Filming slow motion B-roll can set your content apart and quickly take your videos from amateur to professional, when done right, that is.
In this video, we're going to show you everything it takes to creating a professional looking slow motion video, regardless of what device you're shooting on.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tips and Tricks. I'm Maya.
And I'm Joey.
And today we're going to show you how you can very easily shoot some cinematic slow-mo B-roll on any device, mobile, DSLR, whatever.
But first, before we get into that, make sure you hit like on this video, hit subscribe, and also hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos.
First, why would you want to film slow motion anyway?
Well, generally everything looks better in slow motion. You can take the most mundane things like just simply walking and make it look really cool if you add the right music and the elements on top of it.
Before we get into that, we need to explain a few things, starting with frames per second. So videos are essentially just images stacked up against each other to make a moving video. So it's like those little doodles you used to do in your notebook when you were a kid, of a little bouncy ball in the corner of the notebook and you would make it bounce by flicking through it. That's essentially what a video is. It's loads of different images to create a video. So essentially, the higher the frames per second, the more snaps you've captured for that video.
But that doesn't always mean that a higher frame rate is necessarily a good thing. Generally, when you have loads of frames squeezed within 1 second, the motion of that video becomes really, really smooth. Now, if that's the look that you're looking for, that's all good, and you'll generally find that kind of look when it comes to kind of US dramas, UK dramas, like sitcoms, that kind of thing. They tend to have that faster motion, or when you're watching sports like UFC or soccer, rugby, whatever you want to call it. Whereas a slower frame rate, like 24 frames per second, is a much more cinematic looking frame rate. So when you go and watch a movie in the cinema, also some sitcoms as well, you'll see they have a slower kind of frame rate, so slower images per second, which generally gives it more of a juddery look, and that juddery look is what makes it look cinematic.
Like we said, the higher frame rate isn't necessarily better. So if you're filming in 60 frames per second, that doesn't mean you're going to have a better video. It just means that you have more frames and it can actually look a little bit more unnatural. You'll require a little bit more light and it will use more data, which actually means it can reduce the quality of your video. This is not the case for slow motion footage, however, because you will be lowering it down to 24 frames per second, which is the standard in the US, and then 25 in the UK. For slow motion, you'll need a minimum of 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second, depending on where you're based.
So the higher the frame rate goes, the more you'll be able to actually get that effect of slow motion. So on some devices, you can shoot all the way up to 50 or 60 frames, but like we've got GH5 Lumix in the office, which you can unlock to shoot to 120 frames. Some mobile devices now still actually let you shoot all the way up to 120, which is pretty amazing. The Red that we're shooting on right now doesn't shoot that high, so it's pretty interesting to see new devices allowing you to have that much that much freedom with your frame rate. But the short of it is that the higher that frame rate goes, the more images you capture in 1 second, therefore the slower it looks when you go and actually slow it down. So the higher your frame rate, the better the slow-mo is going to look. But you also need to take shutter speed into consideration. Now, I'm not going to try and tell you what that is from the top of my head, so I'm going to read it off this piece of paper. So shutter speed is how long the shutter is open when capturing footage. So when your shutter's at 1/50th, it's open for 1/50th of a second. The longer it's open, for example, like 1 out of 25, so 25th, the more light that's let in. So to put this into more of a practical context, like when your shutter speed is low, your image generally looks a little bit more fluid and blurry. So blurry might not be the right word, it's more like kind of smooth, right? So it's not going to always look kind of like juddery. The higher your frame rate is, the higher your shutter speed is, the more juddery your image is going to look. So if you think of like an action movie, like a Walking Dead series, or I don't know, like any kind of horror flick you've seen, when someone's running really fast or something tense is happening, generally what happens is the shutter speed goes up and it creates this frantic kind of motion. So you'll see this a lot in movies when there's high action scenes, that shutter speed always goes up. Whereas if it's just someone sitting down and talking, the shutter speed normally just goes back to its regular kind of setting. Just as a rule of thumb, your shutter speed should generally be double what your frame rate is. So if you're shooting in 25, your shutter speed would normally be a 50th. If it's 24, it will be a 48th, and so on and so on. One last thing to consider with shutter speed is your light is affected. So when the shutter speed starts going up, you'll notice that if you're using any kind of artificial lighting, like LEDs and things like that, LEDs not so much actually, because when you're using tube lighting that has an actual bulb or a filament, when you're using those kinds of lights, it starts to create a bit of a flicker in the lens. You have to be really careful about the shutter speed as you're adjusting it. Just keep an eye on the screen to see if it's doing anything. Sometimes it's really subtle, so you have to be very careful of that.
Okay, so school's over now. Let's go shoot some content and we will give you some tips along the way, why we're filming it a certain way, how we're filming it, using a DSLR and a mobile phone.
So the first thing we're going to do when we shoot is just get the frame rate right. So we can see it's currently set into 4K, shooting at 50 frames per second, which is great. So that'll be pretty much all we need there. You can see the other settings there, 25 frames. There's more 50 frame settings here, but we'll stick with the 50 frame one, and that should be good. Step in a little bit. Yeah, go for it. So the first thing to think about here is trying to have a nice wide lens so you can get enough of the action in. Also, it helps you to keep the camera stable as well. One of the things with slow-mo is the more the camera moves, the more noticeable it is on a slow-mo. So it's nice having a wide lens. It's more forgiving on things like judders and movement. And it really helps with this kind of effect.
So I'm using the iPhone 12 Pro. Most phones have this function though. A lot of them have just like the slow-mo, but I would prefer to actually change the frames per second myself, which you can just do here. So you can change from 25, 30 to 60, which is what I'm gonna be doing. And we're gonna get some Nindy walking. So if you start there, and then when I say go, walk towards me. You want there to be some movement in the shot, otherwise what's the point in slow-mo? If it was just someone stood still, it wouldn't look very good. So I'm gonna get Nindy to walk toward me, yep. Model walk. Work it, work it. So it can either be him walking, or if you'd like to stand in the middle, please. Or I can be the movement. He can stand still and I can move around him. And then I'm adding some movement into it and it'll look a lot better.
So this next one, I'm going to talk about movement speed. So I'm just filming Nindy kind of walking. Now, it's important to just maintain distance with the subject, so that allows you to kind of keep focus correct, especially in slow-mo. If you're changing focus and shifting focus, it looks really bad in slow-mo. Also, the movement speed should be pretty organic, so you don't have to necessarily walk slowly if you're doing slow-mo. You just walk at an organic, normal pace just to keep it realistic and make it look as natural as it possibly can.
So there were some really mundane things in slow motion and we made them look pretty cool. I mean, you let us know what you think in the comments, but now let's look at some cooler things in slow motion. There you have our tips to filming some stunning slow motion. If you want some more tips on how to film B-roll, we actually made a video all about that and you'll find that in the description box. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe because we are often here making some really cool knowledge dropping videos.
Remember to leave some comments as well, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you in the next video.